Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and today I'm going to do a video on a new series of stuff that I wanted to do. I know it's been a while since we've been doing any episodes. Our our day jobs might have come in conflict with the show, which I'm sorry to say, but our plans will always come back and continue to do more. But you're looking at all this stuff and saying, what is this stuff? Like, nobody talks about this stuff. So he's really trying to make moves into the future, talking about comic book stuff. And let's go through it. We're going to start with a blank slate. All right, and you say, what is that? Have you seen the tiny thing in the corner box? All right. This is known as the new DC. Right? Now you're thinking the new DC is, of course, the Dark Knight, the Watchmen, and V for Vendetta. And you should always say Man of Steel because it brought Superman back into prominence. Well, I would always add, what's that other thing? I would add the NAM. Other people want to fight on it. But if we start... We're going to start with a couple of books that aren't necessarily, what's the start of this? Let's say Batman 400 is the end of the new DC, right? And let's say the start of it is the Legion of Superheroes. Let's put this one in the middle, right? As we see here, this is like the start of the Great Darkness Saga. This is a good template to say what the new DC was, right? Now, to give you a precursor of what was going on at DC in the same time the X-Men hit it big, that's when DC was doing their new DC, right? You see the tagline here, more new pages from the new DC. Can I zoom in on that? Yeah, I have to move it, but you see there's more pages in these new DC books, so-called, right? And you see before that, the tagline over here is where action is, right? So they have a tagline. There's a couple of taglines for the new DC. There's also No Stopping Us, so you might see that on these covers. So to give you a precursor of this, as I said I was going to do, is that Marvel, the 70s was kind of down period for comics. They're feeling like it was going to be over. DC had went through the implosion. They had the struggle of going to 25 cents, and Marvel went to 20, and then ultimately everyone went to 25 cents. And at the same time, you had, I think, Warlock and Captain Marvel was kind of doing all right for Marvel, but it was more of I guess it got canceled. So there was buzz around it, but it wasn't like a big title. Obviously, the X-Men became the title, but before that, we had Star Wars that was big for Marvel, and that also goes in line with Conan, which were books. There was magazines for Conan. So this is all connected to Roy Thomas, right? So Roy Thomas is the creator of the All-Star Squadron based on the All-Star Squad that was done in the 70s. And I think there was an early one before that, right? So in this, I think it might be Earth Prime. I'm not sure. I always felt it was supposed to be Earth 2, but I think they had this as Earth Prime. But anyway, let's keep going forward, right? So Roy was a big deal as far as writing, and Marvel wanted to keep him, but they didn't want to pay him 2 salaries. They wanted to give him a big salary that would go along with him writing stuff. And he wanted 2 salaries since obviously he's a hot hand, but he was saying it's 2 jobs. Why am I doing that, right? So I don't have any behind the scenes exactly of what the new DC was, of Jeanette Kahn. So I need to do some research, but I don't have to be doing these books, so I'm just going to give you the overview quickly, right? So Roy then goes to DC. He already told Marvel, since he weren't taking him as a what's the name? As editor-in-chief, that he was going to also do work for DC. And Marvel kind of decided, that's not working for us. So they moved on, right? Now DC wasn't doing numbers, even though but they did have Superman, right? So the Superman the movie, they had Superman Treasury Edition, Superman versus Wonder Woman. I think Superman versus Muhammad Ali might have been after that. I'm not sure the time frame. So that's not really new DC, but at the same time, you start to see they're starting to crack through, right? And the books that are starting to crack through for DC is The Legion, which had already was going out guns blazing, since I think Roy Thomas was on that for a short while, like a couple issues. He was the one to initially speed up the return of Superboy to the title. And then we also had the new Teen Titans. Marv was originally a DC guy that went to Marvel and hit it big, became the editor-in-chief. George Perez was an artist who was an up-and-coming artist, and they got back together and they did this Titans book. And this was a big book for the time. This is an action-packed book. It also has quiet moments, special issues, topical issues. It kind of took what it took the Stan Lee Kirby Fantastic Four, and it also took the X-Men, and it took the Neil Adams Green Arrow, which was topical, and they pushed it all into this sandwich. So it's kind of taking all the Neil Adams stuff, all the Kirby and Lee stuff, and mashed it into this one big book that was hugely successful. And at the same time when they did that, they also found time to say, we're going to have quiet moments. And you can see this ripple through DC where they were able to do more quiet stuff, right? So they weren't initially, new DC books, but they led the charge, right? So this is some of the books I'm going to go through. Obviously, I would love to do more Titans books. The Perez books are a little bit harder because they're very dense. But to give you an overview, I bought this one off the stands, right? I bought this one off the stands, which is I felt around the same time, but this has the tagline of the new DC. Now, this is one of the few books that had the style of Neil Adams in this, right? So Marvel was like on their side, they had Bill Sienkiewicz, they had Byrne, they had Brent Anderson, kind of guys that were in the Neil Adams mode. So it felt like DC was doing a lot of Neil stuff in the 70s, and Marvel kind of picked up that baton in the 80s. But this is one of the books that had this. We have Jerry Ordway is also on this book. So he inks it, and then I don't think did he ink it just but early on, Jerry Ordway inks it. So you can see some of the new talent come in here. We have Paul Levitt, and we have Keith Giffen. There's some books I'm not going to have, like Ambush Bug and what's the other book? Swamp Thing. But they're definitely part of the new DC. So we're going to go through some of the new stuff that was in there. You're going to see the tagline change. I'm not sure. This might be I wanted to include this Ditko thing that he did, which is more 1980. Maybe it is under it. But it's one of his more dynamic characters for the period. And one of his more dynamic creations. Starman, who really looks like a dynamic character. Right? We also have the comic, the Comic Pros. They loved Atari Force, Jerry Conway, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, which was connected to the Atari video game. There also was a graphic novel that kind of went along with it. If you don't have this, you should go out and get it. It's by Superman writer Elliot S. Maggin and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. It's an interesting kind of graphic, but it's a sci-fi thing. It's DC sci-fi book. This is this is the graphic. Now they're not connected. They're loosely connected to the Atari thing, but it's a totally different set of characters in there. Right? We can see from here to there, right? And bits of this and that would show up in the 90s, and the Legion showed up in the 90s image explosion guys. One other thing that was hot at the time, which was part of the British invasion. No, it wasn't. Actually, it wasn't. It was this book here, which was Batman and the Outsiders. This was Mike W. Barr and Jim Aparo. But then the British invasion came where Alan Davis, who worked with Alan Moore, started drawing it. So I wanted to call in this. This is kind of a little bit later because it's the DC 50th. But we can see the new tagline here, right? The new DC, there's no stopping us now, right? Right? We also had something that I had no idea about. Some friends of mine brought it up. So I looked at it and it's very gorgeous stuff. It's Blackhawk, right? They started doing a new series. This is possibly one of the most dynamic books done by Mark Ebener and Dan Spiegel. It's definitely a book you should check out. Now, on more of the fun side, since I said that I wasn't going to do Amber's Bug, we also had The Blue Devil, right? Now this is by, I'm going to have to use another book because it's like Gary Cohn, Mishkin, Paris Cullens, who we've got interviews with. He used to come to the comic book store in my neighborhood. I don't think I ever told him that story. He drew a panel of all the heroes that stayed in the comic store. I thought it was Perez. A friend of mine said it was, who worked at the store, said that was Paris Cullens. And I was just like, wow, oh man, maybe he'll do the X-Men, which is my default saying. But this book here, and he looks like more like Jake Gyllenhaal, but this was a fun book. It's the closest, it's one of the closest. There's a couple books that are going to be close to Marvel Spider-Man. But let's keep going. I'll leave this one for we got a third book, a mini-series, Deadman by Andrew Heffler. He was the Superman editor when Byrne was on it. But that will come later, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. Here's DC's other Spider-Man, which was The Fury of the Firestorm. Now, this one had a regular guy who's connected to a scientist. Instead of being Captain Marvel, they would merge into one person, which was Firestorm. And I think this is Jerry Conway and what's the name? Pat Broderick, who is one of my favorite artists at the time. There's a couple of things during this period that happened before this, which was, I think it's Jerry Conway and Keith Pollard, which I had one of those books as a kid, and I was like saying, how does something that dynamic not be a big deal? But we also had the British invasion. We have Dave Gibbons. This happened before, before The Dark Knight. So we had some Dave Gibbons. We had, who's that guy? Alex Toth. But I do want to mention there was some buzz around Keith Pollard did some Green Lantern and it's gorgeous stuff. So I think I have to go purchase that, but I think there's going to be a lot of stuff. So I got to find that in my budget. Now I showed you the All-Star Squadron. They had I guess you could say a spin-off book, which was the children of the All-Star Squadron of the Earth 2 heroes, which was Infinity Inc., right? And this was, now Jerry Ordway Roy Thomas and Jerry Ordway would work on this. Jerry Ordway would also work on the All-Star Squadron. And obviously, I think Don Newton would draw an issue, and then Todd McFarlane would take over that. But that, I'm not really considering the the new DC. We're gonna go through this. Yeah, so these are some of the books. Maybe I'm trying to figure what would be the best ones at this point. But I'm gonna just keep going through to show you kind of the books, and maybe there's stuff you want to see first. Madame Xanadu, who is reuniting Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers. It was only a one-issue thing, right? Because they took their character and they went off and they created Scorpio Rose. But even though it doesn't have a tag of it, I kind of put it in the category of the new DC, right? So then we got a couple of more obscure stuff, right? You're not going to be surprised. You're going to be surprised at the next one. And I'm throwing in Supergirl, right? First electrifying issue. Now, this stuff is some of the more interesting stuff by Carmen Infantino. And it also has an artist that I don't know that well, who is Bob Oscar, right? Now, it's written by Paul Kupperberg. And you can see there's some, it's in Carmen Infantino's later style, but there's some interesting stuff that's going on here. And not just the headband, which people made a big deal about, but hey, the Kryptonians had headbands. There's some very interesting art in this book. They also had Eduardo Barreto, who did one issue, but this combination of these two artists and the Bob Oscar, he does the backup feature of Lois in this story, in this comic book, which he does some interesting stuff because it's just more detective type stuff with Lois. But it'd be interesting with the fact that, Carmen Infantino was getting older. He didn't have a heavier hand, but at times there's some stuff in there that really, I was just shocked how dynamic this book was. So I am trying to figure what would be the best issue to do, because I'm not sure you're going to sit around for 23 issues of Supergirl and the movie, which was done by Gray Morrow. But hey, I'm giving you an idea now. At the same time, you can see there was some Marvel talent coming there. And we have Ronin, right? Now, this is the first issue of Ronin, and Ronin also came with, if you kids didn't understand it, we had the pros telling you how great it was. So this is always an interesting book to have because you should, check it out. Now, we showed you Infinity Inc., the Titans, the Legion, All-Star Squadron, all those groups. Remember, the X-Men were big, so we get our last couple of things. We got to go to the Omega Man, right? The Omega Man had showed up in the, do I have it here? I think I do, yeah. The Omega Men showed up in the Titans. I got a book somewhere around here where they show up in the Green Lantern. They show up in Superman. There was a ton of buzz around these guys. Now they're kind of only known for Lobo. And at some point, I haven't bought too many of those, but at least I got this now. I can get the other ones hopefully for cheap, and we can go through it. But there's a different dynamic of space that Keith Giffen did on this. He didn't stay on the series for long, but these extreme wides gave it that real sci-fi feeling. And it's kind of tough to do the stream wides, but Keith Giffen was just in the right place, doing the right style of art, and really with the large cast that he's been working with, using these extreme wides work a whole lot. Now, even though I don't necessarily consider it a new DC book, I'm just going to put a nod to Superboy, because I bought this at the time when I was first getting into comic books. And I used to buy this, and It was as a kid. It was one of my favorite books, even though it wasn't as dynamic as X-Men, or to me, All Star Squadron, Super Friends. That I'm giving a nod to this because it's, even though I don't consider it a real new DC book, because it's kind of in the style of the old, like old Superman, the Silver Age or Bronze Age stories, right? So it kind of goes into his secret identity, that sort of stuff. There's some things that Paul Kupperberg was doing in here to kind of update the story. So even though he was kind of stuck doing like Silver Age and Bronze Age stories, he was moving Clark Kent forward just slightly. So, I thought it was going to end. This is the craziest thing that ever happened to comic books. And Aquaman, the limited series. Now, Aquaman had never really hit, but this, I didn't get it when it came out. But a few months later, I saw this cover and I was like, what the hell is this? And they finally fixed Aquaman's costume. So it was kind of like, wow. And the story's really great. The artist, Craig Hamilton. Oh, I didn't say, this is Roger Sifler. And obviously Keith Giffen. Here we have Kurt Schaffenberg and Paul Kupperberg. Hopefully I gave you all of the credits, but I don't know who the writer was. The writer had a whole plan for another miniseries, but DC somehow decided that Aquaman shouldn't be in this costume regularly because he was only going into some unknown waters beforehand. But this connected it to, I think, or was it Orion or something like that? Yeah, this guy. So this is another part of the, I don't have any of those comic books, so I didn't really connect to them. There was another new DC character, Neil Posner. Okay, yeah, so there's some interesting artwork here, right? And it's a really good story. And I would really consider this a new DC book. This obviously saw, this was also had the Baxter books. The Teen Titans had one. The Legion had one. Obviously, Ronin was a Baxter book. So we get into the end. Now, outside of the X-Men and some other things, the book that's wholly forgotten and one of the top books of the new DC period was Camelot 3000. This is 12 issues of Brian Boland art, right? I think Terry Austin inked some of it. Mike W. Barr, who's writer of Batman and Batman the Outsiders. And you get to see him, just doing some, there's some shots that feel like Neil. Obviously, if you look at The Killing Joke, that feels like a full Brian Boland job, but this is right before that. So this is DC. I mentioned that DC wasn't really pulling out a lot of Neil Adams clones like they did in the 70s, but this is Brian Boland. We don't really necessarily consider him that, but at the same time, he had a lot of Neil still in here, and this was a big deal. It's lost its luster the same way I think Superman versus Spider-Man, but at the same time, it's a book to talk about because it was a big deal when it came out in the stores. It was a big deal. So we're gonna end on, which I didn't talk about, which was I can't say that. Also, DC also tried to say, hey, we felt that the numbers on the new guys weren't so bad, so they wanted to bring Jack Kirby back to do the Hunger Dogs, and of course they did. But it hasn't held up the test of time, and it wasn't Kirby's original ending, but hey, I always liked this cover. It's better than his inking on the rest of it, because it felt like maybe if he'd done this for the whole book, it would have been pre-Alex Ross. And since he was redoing the art, maybe it was all painted pages, but that would have cost a lot. But it would have been interesting, right? So lastly, let's go to which I consider the end of the new DC before, I guess, post-crisis, right? Because there's a new DC period. What other I said Swamp Thing and I said Ambush Bug. There are probably some more titles, but these are the majority, and I have a few comic books that I can go through. Definitely Blackhawk, but I say this, and I should have Superman 400 here too, because that was kind of the DC trying to make their next step with Superman. They didn't do it with the regular books, but they took Superman and do I have it in the house? I think I have it in the house somewhere, but first talk Superman 400. I don't have it here, but it has a lot of talents. Marshall Rogers, Frank Miller, Steve Gerber, Steranko. It has all these guys in it. It's a little more complicated story because it's different periods, different takes, different angles on Superman. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So I kind of would consider that the first kind of Superman new DC before pre-crisis, right? Before Man of Steel. And this issue here, right? So Batman issue 400. This would have the arts before he was canned, before, what's that thing? Year One. He did this issue. I'm pretty sure a lot of people had this issue. Because not only does it has all the hot talents. You got Arthur Adams, Terry Austin, Brian Boland. You know, Brian Boland does the end piece, right? So we have Byrne. He does a one page. Mike Grell, Michael W. Kaluta, Carl Kessel. Oh, sorry, it's Kiesel. That's how Rob Liefeld says. Carl Kiesel, Joe Kubert, Steve, Leah Leota, Laialoa. I think that's how he said it. I'm probably wrong. Rick Leonardi, Steve Lytle, Larry Mustard, Bruce D. Patterson, George Perez, Steve Rude, who does, I think, a pinup, Bill Sienkiewicz, who does like the middle, Ken Stacy, Tom Sutton, Ricardo Villagran, and Bernie Wrightson does a couple of pieces in here. So this is a fun book. It's a classic Batman story, and then it celebrates Batman this anniversary in a great way. It's a great ending, and it looked like, I think I bought this off the stands. Might have been a release around the same time Man of Steel was out, but I feel this is right before the changeover. So it's kind of, to me, like the last. I think people might say, I can't really even consider. I have some last stuff. This one went longer than I expected. I have some last stuff to say. I mean, I would put Manhunter in this, but Manhunter is a 70s thing that just fit perfectly during this period. I wouldn't put the Legends of Batman because that was just kind of fixed in continuity. And DC have been doing that all the time, like trying to figure ways to kind of make sense of continuity. So they were doing these books where they would, ultimately fix the continuity of stuff at the same time. What else do I have here? I mean, I could just show you all the comics I have, but that would be pointless. I want to show you something else. Don't go anywhere. But yeah, this book is kind of a, not really, the Batman book isn't really a book to say this is kind of a new DC book. Also don't have the Baxter edition of the New Teen Titans here, or the what's the other one? The New Teen Titans, or the, oh, here, let's see this. I don't have the Baxter edition of New Teen Titans or the Legion. I wanted to point this out because Keith Pollard. This isn't, I don't know, maybe it could be considered new DC, right? But it has a nice shot of the, I would say the British invasion happening beforehand is important. But there's one other thing that I would not put into the new DC category. Is a fixing continuity like the Batman one. And even having the Secret Years, A World of Krypton. These are kind of taking origin and doing another A Man of Steel. Where they kind of say, here's the origin, let's add some things. Let's kind of explain some things. Let's try to figure out why the Krypton had to explode and all this other stuff. So, which, you know, if you consider Man of Steel unnecessary, these ones aren't really, I don't know, it's kind of tough. But, you know, you had these new Frank Miller covers, and they would do things that, you know, that would get Byrne in trouble. But it kind of still felt like a, you know, a Bronze Age book. It didn't feel like a new kind of DC. And new DC isn't saying they were just kind of throwing out everything, the baby with the bathwater. It was kind of taking the existing thing, putting Superman in, I think Clark Kent in college. And Clark Kent wouldn't be, it's like the stage between Superboy and Superman. Now, there's things with Superboy and Superman that you can't connect. You can't connect that Superboy has met Supergirl, and when Superman first meets Supergirl, he doesn't know her. So it's not a correct fit. It's supposed to be a book where they would just do young stories with Superman. You're not supposed to kill yourself with continuity, but DC was killing itself with continuity and trying to connect the pieces that don't connect, right? Or, you know, get into a little more in-depth things, but kind of going to Krypton and seeing people in school and stuff like that, when ultimately Krypton isn't a full-on alien race. It's more like a alien race because it's the world of tomorrow. They're kind of like the World's Fair version of the future, but they're aliens, right? And at the same time, DC has done a few origins where Superman's father sends him off when he's an adult to become Superman, and then they turned it into somehow Superboy. So I can't put these in a new DC thing, even though this one definitely is in the period. This one, less so, right? But it was DC trying to do things. So I'm showing it. I've already done, I might do the Superman stuff different thing, in a totally different thing, because I've already done a bunch of Superman stuff where we get into his origin and the different origins. Batman I've already done, but this is what I'm next going to do. I don't think that you guys are going to sit around for umpteen videos, so I'm going to try to pick one of these issues of each of these books and do a review and see how it goes. But this is, you know, I've been backlogging. I did some buying, you know, so but I need to get more of these Keith Pollard Green Lanterns, because I've had one as a kid and I was really wowed. It was really like Keith Pollard. I know people say he didn't get his due, but the Vigilante. That's what I don't have here. That is definitely a book that's going to get done. The first 3 issues is possibly like some of the best comics ever, like Keith Pollard. So I forgot about that, and that'd be a good new DC book, you know. So but yeah, this is what's coming next. We have the new DC once again trying to make their way. I guess I don't really consider doing Chaykin's Shadow because that's with the Dark Knight. It's kind of tough. So I had to make the decision, but Chaykin's, that was the sign of the next period. So I don't think I'm going to do that. But I should read it, figure out if I want to do a video. But, you know, write back and let me know if any of the stuff that you want to see or specific issues that you're thinking of, right? But I think that's about it. That's kind of the thing. I don't think I have some of these books, but some of these other ones, I hadn't had a Superboy book in who knows how long. So I bought that one. I think that was one I had. So that's why I bought that one. And it's not going to give you too much new DC, but it's, it was a thing that was, that I was into as a kid. So, yeah, so it's in the period of not stuff that I don't think is new DC, but there's some different approaches to it, and it's not a historical thing, right? So, all right, Spin Rack out.